Hi, I'm Drew Klaber with Minnesota America Corporation. I'm here with Jeremy Banks, and on today's Tool Tip, we're going to be discussing the difference between skidded and skidless surface finish measurements.
So Drew, many of my customers have questions on when to use skidded versus skidless surface finish.
Right.
So do you think you could take a couple minutes and explain what the difference between the equipment or maybe some different uses that you would have with these devices?
Absolutely, and to start out, before we really get into the difference between skidded and skidless, let's take a look at the components that make up a surface finish gauge.
Okay. So Drew, what equipment do we have here right now?
So I have two units. I have a skidded and a skidless system.
Okay.
These are both made by Minnesota, but these could be, in effect, any brand of surface finish measuring system. All systems are made up of the same components. You have a stylus, and the stylus is the piece that contacts the surface to do the measurement. The stylus feeds into a detector. The detector takes the movement, translates it into a signal that can be measured, and then we have the drive unit, which pulls the stylus and detector assembly back and forth for the measurements. That'll plug into an amplifier, which is where you get your readings from. Now, this is a skidless system, as I mentioned. The skidded system is very similar, except you'll notice that the stylus and the detector are all one piece here. Okay. So I still have the stylus that's protruding out from the detector, but around it is a housing, and that housing is what we refer to as the skid right here.
So what's the purpose of the skid, Drew?
The skid is going to act as a mechanical datum for your surface that you're measuring. On a skidless system, that datum is actually inside the drive unit. So you're going to find that most entry-level systems are going to be the skidded unit with the housing around the stylus.
So Drew, now that I understand the physical differences between the devices, what are some differences in application? Great
question. So let's take this pin, for example. That doesn't have to be a pin, it could be any customer application, but it's a piece that somebody needs to measure surface finish on. Okay. As I'm looking at this pin, there's really multiple areas that can be measured. We can measure the top face, we can measure along the axis of the pin, we can measure over the radius. And that's really going to make a difference which unit we use based off what needs to be measured on here.
Okay, well, let's just say I wanted to measure along the axis.
Okay, so if you're measuring along the axis, a skidded unit would be great, because what's important with the skidded unit is that after it makes contact with the part, that the skid is always in complete contact with the surface that's being measured. So if you look at the skid here, there's no gaps between the skid and the part anywhere. It's not sitting at a kind of a weird angle to where the beginning or the end of the skid is off. It's nice, even contact, to where if I were to move the stylus or the skid back and forth, it's always in contact with the part.
And that's important because the skid is the datum, and if the datum isn't making good contact with the part, you get inaccurate measurements, right?
That is correct. So if you were to measure along the axis of this part, you'd be fine. If you wanted to measure the top face of this part, you'd be fine as well.
Okay. Now what if I wanted to measure radially?
That would be an issue with the skidded system. So let's flip the part up here. Now if I were to present the stylus to the area, as I move the stylus back and forth across the part, you notice depending on where I am, either the beginning or the end of the skid are going to be off of the surface that's being measured, right? I'm either going to have a gap at the beginning or gap at the end of the measurement.
Right, and this would be bad because that's the datum and it's not making consistent contact with the part.
That's correct. Now, if I were to take a measurement with this, I could probably spend some time with the setup and actually get a number that's going to show up on my amplifier, but that doesn't mean that the number is a good measurement that I can trust.
Okay, so in an application like this, a skidless system would be better?
That's correct. So you'll notice as I bring a skidless system in for measuring, that by not having a skid, I can actually bring the stylus in contact with the surface. I'm going to get a very good measurement here. You're going to be able to trust these numbers that you're getting from this unit.
So as long as I stay within the stroke of the detector?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Depending on the unit you have, that will vary how much actual stylus travel you have.
So as long as I stay within my stylus travel, I can measure radially across the part?
That's correct. That would be no issue to actually have the stylus traverse from side to side. Obviously, I'm moving the whole drive unit here, but in an actual measurement process, it would just be the detector moving the stylus.
Drew, that makes sense, measuring round parts versus straight parts. Are there any other features that would lend themselves to a skidless device versus a skidded?
Absolutely. So let's switch parts for a second. And now we're going to take a look at a piston. Notice the piston has a small groove here on the outside diameter. If we wanted to measure this groove, it might be a little difficult to do with the skidded system because as I start to move my stylus in, you notice the skid is larger than the groove that I need to measure. So I could not actually measure the bottom surface of this groove with a skidded unit. However, if I bring my skidless system in, now you'll notice I can easily not only reach the groove that needs to be measured, but I still have room to measure from side to side along that groove.
So let's say that I have a part with a groove that's a little deeper, or maybe it's a little more narrow. Is there some flexibility in the type of styli that I can use?
Absolutely. With both the skidded and the skidless systems, there are different styli that can be used with that system. So if you need to reach deeper within a part or down within a groove, maybe at a little bit of an angle for a gear tooth, we can accommodate for that.
Okay.
There are more styli options available for skidless systems than there are for skidded systems typically though.
Okay. So other than the physical limitations of the workpiece, is there any other reason that you would use a skidded versus a skidless device?
It's going to come down to what parameters you're measuring.
Okay.
And when I say parameter, most folks are familiar with terms like RA, RQ, RZ. Those are the parameters that you're actually measuring with the surface finish gauge. Because it starts with the R, it's a roughness parameter. Any gauge, whether it's skidded, skidless, can measure the roughness parameters.
Okay.
If your parameter starts with a W, it's a waviness parameter. We can't actually measure waviness parameters with a skidded unit because the skid itself will mechanically filter out the waveform. So if we're going to look at waviness, WA, WT, or common parameters, we have to start with a skidless system for those measurements.
Okay, great. So Drew, I got to ask, if the skidless system seems a little more versatile, why would someone purchase a skidded system?
Typically, your skidded systems are going to be your entry-level systems.
Okay.
They're going to have a lower price point on the initial system itself. Once you get into the skidless system though, you'll find that the replacement styli are going to be less money than a skidded system because on a skidless, the stylus is a standalone, as to where skidded, the stylus and the detector are both one body, one housing.
Okay, so if I had a simple measurement where I just want to measure a flat piece for an RA, a skidded or a skidless would work either way.
That's correct.
And if I want to start measuring round parts or I want to measure grooves, then I might move into a skidless system.
Exactly, and when in doubt, feel free to give us a call, look us up online. We'd be more than happy to help determine which is the best unit for not only your application, but for your budget as well.
Well, Drew, really appreciate the time today.
My pleasure.
I really helped me out. I think it'll help my customers out as well.
Very good. Thank you guys for watching today's tooltip. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the fields below. If you have any suggestions for future tooltips, please let us know that as well.
Also, if someone had some suggestions or some questions about how they're measuring their parts.
Absolutely. Leave them in the comments below. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call at 888-MITSUTOYO or look us up online at www.mitsutoyo.com.